So we are here in ancient Stahyra, which is the birthplace of Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, and the third of the famous Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. This is hometown for Aristotle, or at least the part that's been reconstructed, recovered. So we'll do a little panoramic shot. It's kind of a rainy, stormy day here in Stahyra, which is the wine-dark sea of the Aegean on which the Greek navy sailed. It seems like it's a good place to come today. Aristotle, of course, is famous for his major dispute, or at least difference of orientation with regard to Plato. Plato had his famous theory of the forms that held that the heavens above contained the models or the ideas, the ideal shapes or forms of all things, and then the things that we saw here at the earthly level were shadows or copies of these heavenly perfect ideas. Aristotle started his philosophy at the bottom and built up, and so he said, no, these things here, this is what's really real, this is the level of reality. We can talk about forms above or matter underneath, but reality is this horizontal experience, this is what we can know and understand. So Aristotle would have been an empiricist in terms of his epistemological orientation. We know by touch and taste and smell and sight. This is how we come to understand our world. And Aristotle said that philosophy is born out of this desire to understand, this desire to know. And he even gave a kind of formula for understanding a thing. In order to understand a thing, we need to be able to give a fourfold account of it. Aristotle talked about the four causes that everything has. So we can kind of think of this stoa, this porchway area here, as a thing that we might desire to understand. And if we were to really know it, we would have to be able to give a fourfold account of it. For example, there's the question of the material cause, which would be the matter out of which the thing was made. And so in this case, we have limestone and marble that are the rock, the stone that make up the thing. We've got these stubs of the pillars that would have held up the roof of the stoa. So the material cause would be the matter. And then there is the formal cause, which is the shape or the design or the idea or the blueprint. That would kind of correspond to Plato's ideas or Plato's forms. And so in this case, an architect or the city fathers had an idea as to the kind of a building that they wanted here, and they wanted it to have certain dimensions and certain widths and certain heights. And those ideas, that form or shape then, is the formal cause, the form of the thing. But it doesn't do any good to have a pile of rocks and a great idea. You've got to put them together somehow. And so next we would have the efficient cause, that which acts upon the material cause in order to achieve the formal cause. And so in the case of a building like this, it would have been the stonemasons and sculptors who would have gathered the stones and shaped them and arranged them to form the building. And they would be effective or efficient in terms of bringing about the building that was desired. But for Aristotle, the most important cause is the final cause, the Greek word telos, the end or the goal. Why does the thing exist? So a building like this would have been downtown Stahyra, the primary meeting place. The Stoic philosophers were called Stoics because they hung out in the stoa, the colonnade area here, where city business would have been conducted. Perhaps the city elders would have sat around, and of course the early philosophers were called Stoics, many of them, because they would hang out in the stoa and talk about the meaning of life and their understanding of the world around them. And in the case of the four causes, the final cause is really the most important one because it drives everything else. I mean, if you say we need a place to sit around out of the elements, well then that's going to determine what kind of matter you use and what kind of form or shape it is, and those things are going to determine what kind of workers or efficient cause. And so most importantly for Aristotle, the final cause is actually the first cause, the one that drives all of the others. Now, buildings aren't that interesting, they're sort of interesting, but Aristotle really applied sacrifice these things to naturally occurring things. And so the most important object of study is man. And so for Aristotle, we would need to know the four causes of man as well. So we could talk about flesh and bone as our material cause. The Greeks would have thought that the soul is that which shapes us or forms us. In contemporary dialogue, we would talk about probably something like DNA as the genetic material that forms or shapes our bodies, so that we would have the particular height, weight, and hair color, and other material factors would be determined or shaped by DNA. In terms of efficient cause, how did we come to be? Well, you'd start telling that story probably with your parents. Your parents are the ones who caused you to be by some measure, but that's not the whole of the efficient cause. I mean, there would be all the other influences in your life, friends and teachers and tragedies and triumphs and churches and pastors and the people who have become important to you and the important events. All those things would have had an efficient, effective shaping of making you as a person. But just as with buildings, the question of final causation, why are we here? These are the philosophy questions that keep us up late at night trying to figure out what's the purpose of it all? Why am I here? Maybe life has no meaning, or maybe it's up for us to choose any meaning we want, as the later existentialists would say. But Aristotle said that our reason for existing is happiness. One of his books of ethics was called the Eudaimean Ethics, this idea of a certain kind of happiness or pursuit of happiness. Christian philosophers and theologians like Thomas Aquinas later on would follow in Aristotle's pathway and agree that happiness is the right goal, but it's happiness defined appropriately as seeing Jesus and being conformed to his image, the so-called beatific or happy vision to see Christ and be like him. And then even the Westminster Divines, when they wrote the Westminster Catechism, sort of starts in a strange place. They start by asking, what is the chief end of man? That seems like a strange way to start a theological statement, but chief end is really final cause, the main purpose for being here. And so the Catechism begins, what is the chief end of man? And of course the famous answer, to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And that reaching back to joy or celebration or happiness is actually a kind of an Aristotelian reach all the way back to the 4th and 5th century BC, when Aristotle's ideas would have been prominent, and we would have this happiness orientation. That's why we're here, to be happy in a certain way, the kind of happiness that pursues and enjoys God. And even in the 17th century, we're constructing theology along Aristotelian lines. I guess we could say it all began here in Stagira. Aristotle later leaves home and heads down to Athens and studies with Plato, but this is where he got his start.